Whether we are there or not, ITSP Magazine still gets the best stories. Plenty of conferences and events spark our curiosity and allow us to start conversations with some of the world's brightest minds. In person or virtually, Sean Martin and Marco Ciappelli go on location and sit down with them at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society. Together, we discover what the synergy of these three elements means for the future of humanity. At Level Blue, we simplify securing your most valuable business assets by providing broad cybersecurity experience and award-winning services. Level Blue manages the risk. You reap the reward. Learn more at levelblue.com. Coro, the leading cybersecurity platform purpose-built for small and medium-sized enterprises, protects against malware, ransomware, phishing, data leakage, network threats, insider threats, and email threats across devices, users, networks, and cloud applications. Learn more at coro.net.
Vroom, vroom.
Vroom, vroom.
Usually you do that.
I know. I do the motor sound that we're actually driving.
Yep.
I'm just driving, actually.
Yeah, you are?
Yeah.
See you there.
I'm not driving. I'm
not
fine.
going to do 4 hours in this heat in the desert. No.
No, the hot desert driving. Yeah. It can be fun. I miss hanging out with you in the car. Maybe that's what
I know. That's why they're called shots on the road.
I know.
The original thing was to actually record in the car. And I remember, and then we're going to introduce the guest. One time we recorded an entire thing, but we put the mic, if you remember, very close to the floor of the car. And it picked up all the vibes of the car. We couldn't hear anything. So you learn as you go.
Yeah,
we would probably record different now with the lapel and everything. But anyway, we're not driving.
Yeah,
but we're still going.
We spend a ton on tech. The tech's better now. But anyway,
yep. But we're still going.
We're still going. We're still going, and we're going to see friends we made over the years, including our guest. I'm just going to get to it because we're punishing him for doing nothing bad. He's actually doing a lot of good, and we're making him sit through our rambling here. Fred, how are you? It's good to see you again. You were on last year with us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me back. Last year was a lot of fun, and I'm excited to be back at Black Hat, also for DEF CON and B-Sites this year. So yeah, it's gonna be a good week, and I'm super excited about this speech about the cyber strategies and more of a policy angle in this problem, because I've learned a lot in the past year, and I got quite a lot of new lessons to share.
I love it. And just a shout out to the last one. It was hacking humans using LLMs, devising and detecting phishing. So, and I'm not going to read the whole title of that, but I encourage everybody to listen to that. It was really cool chat, and I'm glad to have you back. And as you noted, you're speaking again with a group of folks, multilateral framework for evaluating national cybersecurity strategies. You want to, well, let's introduce you first. Who's Fred? What are you up to these days? And then we'll go to some of your other panelists and give a shout out to them.
Yeah, that sounds great. I'm a research fellow in computer science over at Harvard, and I'm just changing this fall to a more policy-oriented side from the engineering school to the Kennedy School, which is the political school. But I'll do more or less the same research as I do now. But I research cybersecurity primarily from a technical perspective. My last 5 years I've been heavily focused on computer science, and that's my background as well. But I'm more and more turning towards business side. This spring, I was partially teaching the generative AI course over at the business school here, and more and more on the policy side now as well. And the reason for that is that after a while in tech research, you realize that cybersecurity is truly a cross-disciplinary problem, and it's not enough to just come up with fantastic technical solution. I can't tell you how many times we interviewed people, pretty high up people for this project, leaders for cybersecurity agencies and so forth, who said that these technical solutions are fantastic, but in the end, we need to convert cybersecurity to growth and profitability, because that's what it all comes down to. And that's sort of my life these days, of trying to find this intersection of technological means that also works with business and makes sense from a policy perspective in the context of cybersecurity. So that's kind of what I'm researching.
That's cool because I did political science, and that was way before we even talk much about cybersecurity. And I'm wondering how it would have affected my choices at the time if we had cybersecurity and political relationship, international relationship, and all this kind of stuff. So I'm glad to hear you actually jumping the other way around. And I want to know what made you decide, you and your other person that did this research with you, these other professionals, to actually tackle this. I mean, you kind of said it, it's going that direction. It's a multidisciplinary approach, but it seems very, very relevant right now, a multilateral framework for evaluating national cybersecurity strategies. So you sit around the table and said, let's do this. Why?
It's a great question. It's actually a quite fun story. So it's over a year ago we started working on this. It was about April last year. It was a conference here at Harvard, and then I was attending. I asked a question. It was a conference primarily on South Korea and security strategies and so forth. But I asked the questions of random hacking stuff, as I usually ask. One of the co-organizers at that conference was Alex O'Neill, who is a fantastic national security researcher, who's my collaborator in this project. And he reached out to me after the conference. Again, this was April last year. I said, hey, I like your question. I like your profile. I would like to work with more tech-oriented people. Should we start a project? And then we started, we really hit up a good collaboration. We liked each other. We had some really complementary skills. And we pivoted a lot of times. We started working on analyzing North Korean malwares on the darknet, and we did some other security stuff. And we went back and forth. After a while, at another conference, we met Lachlan Price is the third collaborator, who was part of, Lachlan was part of creating the Australian National Cybersecurity Strategy, which is an incredible achievement because that's a fantastic national cybersecurity strategy. And we will talk more about what these strategies are. But when we met them, which was a couple of months after we met, Alex and I, and we already started to realize we want to go broader, we want to analyze policies. We can't just talk about tech. We can't just talk about malware. What is our bigger picture? So by now we have interviewed quite a lot of folks who are senior and try to get an idea of what's happening in cyber, what's most important from a national security perspective, what do we need as the US, as other countries, and somehow we started landing on these national cybersecurity strategies. And it was really interesting, and especially when we met Lachlan, we began talking about this. Then eventually we got balled into Eric Rosenbach, who is a fantastic lecturer at Harvard. Got tons of experience from different security gigs in the government and from other places, and incredibly wise person. And we just talked, and over the past year, we realized that this project that we're doing now is exactly what we need to do. And that means trying to define, well, how do countries tackle cybersecurity strategies, or cybersecurity to start with? Well, all of them, most of the countries, especially in the Western world, they have some strategy, right? That's sort of implemented as an official document. And we just try to define, well, what are these documents, and are they actually useful in practice? Me as a tech person, I was quite biased as I entered this. I thought that these documents are just bad. No one uses them in practice. They're just some policy people trying to play cybersecurity, basically. And that's actually not true. The documents are very good. I was happy to be proven wrong, but we just really wanted to know, well, how do you start this? Because cybersecurity, as you said, Mark, it's a quite new problem. It's not a new problem. That's a lie. But this is quite new. There's a lot of countries who haven't already done an established cybersecurity strategy. And just in the past couple of years, a lot of things happened. A lot of strategies were improved. So we wanted to investigate a bunch of things. Sort of, are these strategies good? Well, what are they targeting? Because they're trying to encapsulate all of cybersecurity into one document. What does that mean? What should a country focus on in the context of cybersecurity? And that's all of these questions just snowballed, and the more of them we got, the more we wrote down and sort of chipped away on this project. And over a lot of discussions, we interviewed over 25 people from high up positions on various cyber-related government and industry gigs. And through all these discussions, conversations, our musings, this project sort of organically grew over the past year, from a side project to a relatively large project to be the main focus of my research. It's a quite beautiful progression, actually. And yeah, now this is most of what I do.
It's incredible. And I'm I'm curious because you talked about your shift to business and economics and those connections as well. And I'm curious, did the documents or the conversations you have with the people that you interviewed, did they make those connections as well from a nation state perspective?
Yeah,
or are they purely tech-driven cyber docs?
No, that's a great question, and there are a lot of different documents, but the sort of strategy documents are not very technical usually. There are other fairly technical documents, but there's a lot of people mentioning, especially the sort of economic aspects, and for me, that's been a complete game changer with this past 1-2 years, because for me, we always talk about the sort of security operational trade-off. You can't just have a completely secure system because then you can't use it, right? But even if I tried to think about that before, I kind of over-optimized for making everything secure. Last year when I talked with you about phishing emails, it's kind of the same problem in one way. And I also started my phishing research, which is not a part, but is to quantify the economic aspect of this. And what should you pay to make your employees not fall for phishing and so forth? And in the large context of all cyber attacks, this is kind of what it comes down to, right? What is it worth to increase cybersecurity for a company, for a country, et cetera, et cetera? Some companies, operate on the strategy that we're just going to take the hit and then we're going to pay rather than paying a lot of protection. And for countries, to some degree, it's similar. To some degree, it's not similar because we have a lot of cyber physical systems. Some cyber attacks begin to, be physically threatening for people. But even then, that's the incredible thing with these things, right? Even if a cyber attack can cause physical harm, there are dollar values to human lives, which is say whatever you want. But there are strategy risks calculation for these things, and for me that's been very interesting to see that everything comes back to money in the end. I don't really like it, but that's also the name of the game. And even if I create fantastic technical solutions, if they're too expensive, if they're not feasible, then no one's going to use them. And so many people I talk to always come back to, how does this affect growth? How does this affect profitability? I think you kind of have to come back to that. Then from a country's perspective, how is this implemented? How can a country implement large scale cyber efforts? These things they're definitely technical, but they're also political and they're also business oriented. So I think, you just have to look at the broader perspective.
Well, political science is the art of compromise, and I feel like there is always a compromise where it comes to this kind of thing in cybersecurity too. It's that if it's too secure, it's not usable, and it comes into place a lot of different variables here. So what I am curious to know, and I'm sure it's going to be part of your presentation, but you kind of come up with some kind of a way to give score to this policy, to evaluate how good they are or not. And I'm curious to know how you do that. Is it more of a technical and maybe from a prevalent technical perspective, or again, you put in there all other socioeconomics and political aspect in doing this? Number one. Number two, which may be connected, is how good are if they just stay on their own? I mean, I feel like the success of something like this is when they start cooperating one with another, and I don't know if that's part of the program as well.
Yeah, Marco, these are fantastic questions. So basically, how do we score them, and are these? Can we look at these things in isolated instances, or does everything have to play together? And that's exactly what we asked ourselves too. And I think there are short answers or long answers, and to some degree there are no answers, but these things are complicated to start with, and that's why cyber is so interesting. But to start with, there are some scores, cyber scores, cyber indexes, and so forth that other people have done. I think that's fascinating to look at. I really enjoy that. We found some criticism internally with existing scores from before. We also found other people who quite heavily criticized other cyber indexes, because it's hard to score. We're going to give US a ranking. We're going to give Australia a ranking. And what we did, and I'm very happy that we did this, is we found some of the people who criticized previous rankings, and we called them. And we had meetings with them and said, you bashed down this other index pretty hard. And we see your point. It's hard to score these things. how would you do it differently? And we really had their input on how we could do this. And we learned a lot. So some of the criticism with just scoring in general is that, for example, sometimes you make this isolated, which I think is a big mistake. But you look at US, then you look at Sweden, where I'm born, or you look at the Netherlands. And sometimes you see these scorings, and then the Netherlands has more of a sort of cyber capability than the US. And from one perspective, that can be true because they're very tech savvy, they're digitalized and so forth. But we all know that that's not true, right? It's just like it's difficult. So the way we sort of went about to do this is rather than having absolute scores, we have a relative scoring, which is that we use 3 different categories, which is basically this country a leader, is this country meeting the bar, or are they lagging? And we always look in relation to each other. So we don't look at isolated instances. And that's very, very important because in cyber, there's a lot of shared global resources. Every system is to some degree interconnected. There's a big interconnection in the world. So we only really care about the relative difference, and we don't care about absolute scores. To some degree, we quantify, but we also just look at highlight. We want to see success cases because the main reason about this, although it's very cool to have scores, that's not really our reason to do this. Our reason is just help people write better policies. So we thought, for example, Lachlan in our team was part of creating the Australian framework. Well, he said, like, this is the list that he would like to have when he did the work, because the work is really tricky. And we talked to a lot about other countries, the teams who create these strategy documents, and just taught them, hey, like, what are your problems? What do you think is easy? What was difficult? And then based on this, we created our framework to find out these things that will help them. So it's not focused on scores. It's focused on what are the success cases. If you look at all these countries, what worked really well for the US? What worked really well for Australia? What didn't work so well? What can we learn from? And I think that's really cool. And to the best of my knowledge, we got very positive feedback on that. And that's sort of our plan. We just want to sort of collaborate and take all the knowledge that exists and help facilitate information sharing. Because if there's one thing, and we have a lot of highlights, right? What do everyone think is a good thing? And one thing that always pops up is information sharing, facilitate collaboration. We have to be better at these things. And this is kind of good, I think, because then what happens too is that smaller countries that might not have a national cybersecurity strategy yet, when they want to create a new one, and they don't necessarily care about, what score does this country have? What score does this country have? What they do care about is, what can we learn about this? What should we look at? And the last caveat before I stop part in the talk in this paragraph is that everything is quite context dependent too. So you can't just take a strategy and copy it, because you have to look at the local threat actors. Every document is kind of biased by their surroundings, which makes sense, right? So that's also something we have to kind of take something subjective and context specific and generalize that so that other countries can make it context specific for them. But so that's a long way of saying that we look at the relative difference between countries. And seeing who did this well and why did they do it well and how can other people learn from them.
So I'm gonna throw out a few words, and I'm hoping it'll paint a picture for you in your head because you know this stuff, and something's gonna pop out that's interesting. So, because words that I've heard over the last number of months that continue to rise to the surface, I think there's resilience is one term that I hear a lot about. I've heard risk management kind of shift to exposure management. I've heard, obviously there's been a lot around AI and the AI Act and EU, for example, that changes the other word I'm throwing out now is scope, right? So the scope of these strategies. So, and then of course just dynamics, things change all the time. So dynamic, scope, resilience, and exposure. What do those 4 words conjure up for you in light of the work that you're doing here?
Yeah, that's a great couple sort of words to throw out. Now, I'm going to start with a very scattered ordering and just talk about what makes most sense right now. And one thing that's fun to talk about is AI. We have one part. So our framework is made up of 5 categories. I'm going to, of course, talk about all the categories a lot in Black Hat, but then these categories have a lot of subcategories. For example, one category is how much does this strategy document focus on protecting people and institutions? And subcategories are things such as how well does it protect critical infrastructure and how well does it protect vulnerable populations? And another category is, how well does this document focus on generating capacity? Almost everywhere around the world, we need more cyber people, we need more skilled, competent cyber workers. So how does this count work on generating capacity, and so forth? And one of these subcategories is emerging threats. AI is a big part of that, and we're quite positively surprised by this. There's a lot of work, even in the documents that are a little bit older. We analyze documents that are at least between now and 4 years old, so from 2020 and onwards. And even those are from 2020, 2021, and they talk quite a lot about emerging technologies, building future-proof strategies. So I think I'm relatively happy about that. Also, like when you look at the governmental changes, they work pretty quickly. The US is starting new agencies to the right and left almost, and they do quite a lot to protect against emerging threats. Europe is obviously doing a lot as well, playing the regulation game and so forth. So that's good. Regarding so that's something worth saying. On the other bullets, so you said resilience, I think, and resilience, yes. It's a broad one. One thing in these documents, I think that's really interesting for me, since I come from a technical document. There's not a clear answer, but a question I ask myself a lot is, how technical should these documents be in the context of resilience? Like, should it talk about what protocols to use? Should it talk about not using Windows systems to avoid what we saw last Friday with the whole world being wiped out? Should it go that deep, or should it talk in a more broader context? And that's tricky. Resilience is definitely a focus of the documents. It's often something that focuses not necessarily by mentioning, but by talking about other parts. Indirectly, they build resilience by generating capacity, by protecting critical infrastructure units, and so forth. So that's definitely done, but it's done in different ways. And to some degree, that is the entire purpose of the document. And one thing on that line, because talking about resilience, we also have to talk about measuring resilience. And let's say there's something that most of the documents do well. There's some things that most of the document can learn from and do better. And talking relatively vaguely about needing resilience, of course, every document does that, because that's the purpose of them. Measuring resilience is another part. Some countries have specific progress reports. That's beautiful. I really like that. So that every year, this accountable party is going to do this work to measure how we did this. That's rare, unfortunately. But I think measuring resilience is something we need more from. Because if you're serious with this, and not just creating a document to look good, but creating a document that's transparent for all of the world, or at least your country, to see, and so forth, then you have to have a plan for how do we measure this? How do we hold ourselves accountable? Who is accountable? That's one thing we will look a lot at. So codifying responsibilities and saying, you need to have someone accountable. If no one is accountable, it's not really serious from our perspective. So that measuring aspect is quite big as well. And some does it well, some does it not so well. And in general, I think the strategy documents, one of the highlights that we think they can learn from is to have more specific deadlines, more specific responsibilities, more specific accountable parties. But there are exceptions. Some does this really well.
Nice.
Yep. Sounds to me this is a document that is never going to end. It's I like that you use the word relative. Like, from what perspective are you looking at things? And even when you measure resilience, you're going to measure it depending on where you are, what are the policies, where are the economic situation, what is they're trying to achieve. There is not resiliency as one specific goal. It changes. So I think everything needs to be fluid, and the most important thing, I guess, is collaboration and learn from each other. So I think it's going to be a great conversation, especially because it's on my non too technical side of my brain, politics and sociology and economy and all of that. So I'm going to do definitely my best to come and see the talk, which is going to be Wednesday, August the 7th at 11:20 in the Jasmine A Level 3. And wherever that is, good luck and find it. But I know at Black Hat, there is good people there that are going to point the right direction. Yes. And, it's going to be fun. Sean, it's going to be fun to be there. Good to see Fred in person. Maybe have another conversation with him. I know you guys were chatting about that. And our coverage keeps going and going and going even before we get there. And I'm very excited for this year Black Hat.
Yep. Thrilled to have you on again, Fred. And super excited for this work. And I too can't wait to hear the session and dig deeper. We're not allowed to talk too much about it here. So we'll come and hear all the good bits on location there in Las Vegas. So Fred, thanks for joining us, and everybody listening and watching, thanks for tuning in to our coverage of Black Hat, and stay tuned, lots more coming, and we'll see you all in Vegas.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
At Level Blue, we simplify securing your most valuable business assets by providing broad cybersecurity experience and award-winning services. Level Blue manages the risk. You reap the reward. Learn more at levelblue.com. Coro, the leading cybersecurity platform purpose-built for small and medium-sized enterprises, protects against malware, ransomware, phishing, data leakage, network threats, insider threats, and email threats across devices, users, networks, and cloud applications. Learn more at coro.net. SquareX helps organizations detect, mitigate, and threat hunt web attacks happening against their users in real time. With its innovative browser-native security product, SquareX safeguards enterprise users from a spectrum of web-based threats, encompassing malicious files, websites, scripts, and compromised networks. Learn more at sqrx.com.